All right, we understand how to create a baseline, and we understand how to manage it rationally. It's all based on identifying the components of that baseline, getting them all aligned to some, I mean, they probably aren't really blocks, and they're probably not going to be kept, on the top of a thing here, but the idea basically is to get it in a way that is tangible and understandable to human beings. The machine understands this perfectly, but of course the machine doesn't know that these things exist. All the machine knows is that it's got to execute some code. And so, from your standpoint, what you want to have is this whole coherent baseline, always maintained the way it's supposed to be maintained. Now, people are going to say, well, that takes time, time's money. But the idea basically is that over time, if you don't manage this thing, you're going to start losing elements of this thing, just simply losing them, to a point which is fairly early in the process, where you really don't know what you got here. You just got a bunch of binary code, it could be, by this point, totally ugly. Oh, and by the way, in the middle of all that, somebody came along and put something really, really malicious right here. And since you don't really know it's supposed to be there, or not supposed to be there, you just see the binary representation, and you don't know that this is malicious. In fact, I'm malicious, and then somebody came along and made it even more malicious, and by the time you're done, you got all this dead code sitting here with, that you don't, it's there, you just don't know that it's, a logic bomb or whatever. So the idea basically is to maintain most coherent possible representation, properly labeled, of the existing artifact, product, whatever you want to call it, piece of software. And so this is all of the information I need to have about this thing, all right here. Now, time's going to come when you're going to make enough changes to the thing, you're really going to end up with a different product. And what that involves basically is you have done enough changing to these things here that you've kind of reached the point where your user community wants a new product. Well, how do I get that product? Well, the easiest way to get that product basically is to create a version 2, second version of the thing. And so what's involved basically is taking out whatever needs to be changed in terms of the code, that might be design change. And what that's going to do is produce a totally separate entity here. Okay. Now, if you just do this, you're going to lose track of what you're doing again. And it's never good practice to just throw something together on a working piece of software and hope it works right. What you got to be able to do instead is to run this here through a really extensive quality control process or security control process. This really originates with quality control, but same concept. In order to be sure that what you got is what you want to have. So this runs all the time. It's your basic layer. But what I'm going to do is check out a new one, because this is the new improved model. All these things are going to be highly integrated. A new and improved version of my piece of software. Now, right now, it's not changed in the least, but remember, this is the one that we're running right now, okay? It's an operational use. It's been running 5 years. It's doing great. I keep it up there, but I will really, I've got enough change requests that I really want to make it better, and so I'm going to work on this. And the way I'm going to work on it, basically, is to check this thing out, put it in a different place. This over here is in something called the controlled library. Now, all the controlled library is, basically, is your asset, as it currently exists with no changes. This over here is the dynamic library. You do the same sort of thing with it. It's got to be labeled properly, and so this is N1, which is going to stand for new, version 2. And these design elements are going to be D1, version 2, D2, version 2, and the code that's going to be the product of this is going to be D3, version 2. And that's where a lot of those dot whatevers come from when you're talking about, you know, looking at version control. And this is part of more of the code, so this is D2 version 2. And here's our unit test, which is U2 version 2. And why am I doing all this labeling? Because you got to do the labeling. If you don't do the labeling, you can't keep track of it because it's all kept in a database. You aren't going to be able to keep track of your own artifacts, but you will be able to do it if you got the right labels on it, because you just say, show me everything associated with version 2. And this machine will be happy to do that. And here's your acceptance stuff, version 2. Okay. Now, this is a total rewrite of the system. Basically what we're looking at is a brand new thing. And that would be horrendously dangerous if this thing wasn't still working just fine. So what you do basically is, this is called a control library. This is your asset. It's like it's in a bank vault. You don't touch it. But you can take a copy of it and put it out here, and this is called the dynamic library. And basically, dynamic is another word for doesn't exist right now as an asset. It could be changed at will. Programmers can look at it. It doesn't really need any authorization to be integrated back into your inventory, because the idea basically is you can make some really horrendous mistakes here, you know, for instance, and reintegrate something really, really ugly right here and not really know it. And so, oops, wrong asset. There we go. Really, really ugly and not know it. So what you want to be able to do is to make sure that this thing here, when you're done writing it up, do it correctly, life cycle, specification, specify it, design it, code it, test, all that stuff's done. And at the end of that, you're able to say, it's correct. I know it's correct. It's exactly what we wanted. It works exactly the way we expected it to. These tests have been A1, and so this thing is now safe, and it's worth keeping as baseline. This will now replace this one. And so what we get is what's called reintegration, but the bottom line basically for anybody who knows this thing is that this is put back into the asset base as the new representation of the system. Nicely labeled, and this is now the control baseline. What do you do with this old guy here? Well, being an old guy myself, I value old guys. And so what I do is I put it in a special thing called an archive. Now in here, I've got all sorts of versions of this old thing. And it's got changes in it, you know. I'm not going to do too much of this, but, you know, here's one of the older versions of it. And it was really blocky, but, you know, this is what the code looked like there and that sort of stuff. And we're just running this. This is day-to-day operation. This is a good thing. We know it's safe. Why? Because we inspected the daylights out of it before we integrated it. And the problem you got often in reintegration is that you'll have everything running just fine. You'll do something, it'll have a security vulnerability in it you didn't know about before you did it. And that's only because you just did the code part. And it's really bad practice to try to do this part because, let me get this out of the way. As you can see, this isn't this or this or this or this. And so basically what you got is something over here. It bears no resemblance whatsoever to any of the visual documentation. And so basically you don't know what this is. You know what this is because all these documentation items line up with this here. And basically the testing proves it. And so the bottom line basically is that this over here is now not useless. It's very useful because basically this has got all the changes embedded over time in the archive. And you can do all kinds of trend line analysis and all that sort of stuff that goes along with looking at, well, we made a change and here's what the outcome was and why. And so you got all the lessons learned in the whole wide world. This is your knowledge base right here. And so everything that goes on in this repository, and let's say you got a problem up here you didn't know about. Well, you know, now you have no, I mean, up to this point, if you don't do what I'm suggesting here, you don't have any institutional memory. But if I've got every version of this thing up to 1958, you know, written in the original Fortran, I can go back to this thing, I can see how the problem here evolved. And I can look at fixes and that sort of stuff because I got all the quality control data in order to be able to do that. So what this also gives you is a quantitative basis, or I mean basically all the quantitative information you're going to ever want to be able to make judgments about any questions you have about what you're operating. But this here now is the version 2 baseline. Labeled correctly, kept as an asset. This is what's running. You know it's correct because you took the time to make sure it was correct before you reintegrated it at the end of the testing phases here. And so the acceptance here isn't so much a matter of acceptance. Now it's a matter of decision to reintegrate. This is all visual, so these decisions can be made by the right people, meaning the people that own the system, not somebody sort of down on the bottom of the ship who's actually doing the programming. And the idea basically is to make sure the people you're paying $40,000 a year to aren't the ones who are making the decisions you're paying somebody $200,000 a year to make. So what this does is allow for rational management of software. It allows you to make decisions about your software in ways that are intelligent, because they're based on data. And the most important of all, it ensures over time that the software asset is known at all times. Status of the software asset is known at all times. And that it's maintained that way over time by rigorous, strict configuration control. That's the basis for secure sustainment. Basically, it's just knowing what you got and making sure that what you got is what you wanted to have, and that you're able to access any part of it at any point in time using some automated means, which would be your database. And that's the sustainment process in a nutshell. Thank you very much.